The great questions that I have ended up asking, as well as hearing, reading about throughout my time growing up as a pastor's kid, as well as then being part of a Christian college and seminary and being part of several churches and a company that has dealt with thousands of churches and organizations across the world. What is our ultimate goal as a person, as then even a pastor, as then a local church, as the universal church overall, even historically? What is our ultimate goal? And sometimes I think we try to find the answers in good things that even God created, and even good things of His Word, like make disciples. Or is our ultimate goal as a church to church plant and to continue that? Is it to make disciples? Is it to begin to ask further questions of how do we make disciples? And I think we can continue on. Even what type of church should you be? Is that the ultimate goal? Or are we to glorify God or to worship God? What is the ultimate goal for us? But maybe the answer is not in the things that He created or the things He does in us, but maybe it's just Him. And we try to narrow many times on things of life, even things that He has shared, talked, commanded about. And I think instead of narrowing on those things, maybe we're to narrow on Him, even specifically then, God in the flesh, God, the God-man, Jesus the Christ. And I think when that happens, I think we start to see Him as the ultimate goal through kind of the windshield of our life, and He starts to put everything in context and begins to align it. So we start to see Him as the whole of our life, the great comprehensiveness of our life, versus looking back at us individually or collectively, even a local church or an area or a society. And I think when we start to see Him as the ultimate goal, He starts to align things in life. And it helps us to see clearly what we're to do with life, from what is evil, what is good, from what's in us, from what's not in us, from what's around us. And I think it starts to help us. It starts to help us as pastors specifically to communicate, to teach, to lead people in a way that leads them to have their ultimate goal of who God is, by not putting ourselves in replacement or substitution of God Himself. And we're to help train them, shepherd them, care for them, direct them to feed on Him. And they're to find their life, their sustenance, their encouragement in Him and Him alone. And as He then affects us individually, it becomes a collective, even in a local area. And that great encouragement becomes Him at work in us. And then I think people start to taste of what He's doing in our heart and our life. And so I think if God is our ultimate goal versus disciple making or church planting or becoming a style of church or a type of church or a tradition or a trend of a church, I think when He becomes the ultimate goal, we're able to, as pastors, but also in relationship and friendship, begin to help people see life, parenting, jobs, themselves, people beyond them, their coworkers, their neighborhoods. Because what God has revealed about Him, especially Him being the ultimate goal, He reveals that He works not just in history, in our past. It's not just He will work in the future, but that He works in people's hearts as well as their minds and their life. So we're not training them to be a better attender on a Sunday, to a Sunday service, a small group, a community group, life group, Bible study group, however you want to say it. I think we start to train people in that way, in a sense, to be spiritually exhausted and to be unrealistic in their real life and imbalanced. And we basically train them to do a teeter-totter of schedule, time, and money, instead of being on the foundation, balanced on who God is. And I think Jesus gave a parable about that: sand, rock, foundation. The promise was the storm will always come, the rains will come, the winds will come. So that's always going to be there in a sense, what during our time until he comes. But what is our life based on? Is it based upon where we attend a church, what kind of church, finding the purpose of life and maybe trying to preach the gospel to ourselves or be a type of church plant? I don't think we can find peace in any of that. I think those can start to become aligned to what he has called us to do. And I think then as pastors, we then set the expectation that he's the expectation. That people are to feed on him, not feed on being programatized or traditionalized or religiousized. And what will become true, undefiled religion is when people's hearts and minds and lives become affected by their ultimate goal. The God they say they trust in, or the God that's calling them to trust in them. And when people around them, their neighbors, co-workers, start to hear them or be around them a little bit more, and these people begin to see and to understand what's going on in their life, they start to taste not a church service or a small group Bible study or how awesome and clear our doctrinal statement is, but they taste the true God at work in reality, in real people, through truth and love, his truth and love. And I think that's how God has inspired throughout generations. And as a network of people that come together, I would love to see more pastors be encouraged by this. Not just a network supporting us, but a network that expands an encouragement to say, hey, our ultimate goal is not the size of a church building or a campus. It's not the style or name of a church. It's not church planting. It's not our efforts or works. It's not a specific thing that God has even done in us. It's him. I think that then puts us all on a level playing field. And I think that playing field is rather humble. And I think that playing field and loving him in response begins to love one another. I think that begins to change things. Even how we read scripture and history. We start to not elevate certain things. We start to elevate him, actually recognize who he is and what he has done, especially on our behalf. Graciousness. And I would love to see not just pastors, but people inspired by that great truth of our ultimate goal is him, that he exists. He's only one. He's the creator God. He's created the universe, the galaxies, all the way down to the molecules, to the insects, the ants, let alone the humanity. And I think when people start to see that freshness, they understand the freshness is not the freshness of a new church plant, or it's not the freshness of another new pastor, or a new teaching. I think it becomes the newness that is only found in God. He is the true refreshment. I think that's why David says in the Psalms that he refreshes the soul. That's why his words are an encouragement. They are like water to a thirsty soul. That's good stuff. And if I think we can, as pastors, live by that, let alone equip, train people to that end, to feast on him, to be renewed by him, versus the things that are of him or around him, such as gathering together. Those are good things. Or prayer, that's a good thing. Singing, that's a good thing. Being generous, those are good things. But it's still not our ultimate goal. When God is our ultimate goal, in reality, it's not a day of the week that's set as elevated. It actually becomes the God of the week that becomes elevated. And next thing you know, people start to see each day through his lens. And they start to understand the Old Testament, let alone the New Testament, and the history through his lens. And next thing you know, these become a world perspective. This becomes a conviction. This becomes a spiritual maturity that then outflows because he's at work in us. Next thing you know, people start to share humbly about their life. They start to understand one another, let alone understand his word. There is something great about this, that understanding that he is the ultimate goal, that he is our telos, he is the one who has completed something on our behalf. I think Jesus said on the cross, to telestai, that it is finished. No one else can do this. No one else can put us back into a relationship with our ultimate goal, the ultimate purpose of life, God himself. That's what Jesus did on our behalf. But what he did affects us, it inspires us, it engages us in a deep way, and it helps us think through. It becomes a renewal of our mind to then love, to consider one another, to cherish one another. I think that's how Paul, John, Peter, Jesus himself describe what love is. That we become a people recognizing our ultimate goal because he loved us first. We so then walk in that love. Therefore, we train people not to be mere lovers of people on a Sunday, but we train them to walk beloved by God in real life, to love, to recognize the world around them, and to engage those people that are around them. They're not trying to show off. They're not trying to impress. They're following their exalted ultimate goal. And they start to see struggles and sin and strife and suffering even through that lens. And he becomes the sun, and then Jesus is then the radiance, Hebrews 1 says, that helps us in this life. And he teaches us and he trains us. And I think a beautiful thing that we see in the Gospels is how Jesus trained not just his disciples, but I think anyone, all the way to those Jews that hated him, all the way to Pilate and the Gentiles. He taught in a way that trained them. And he trained them to trust. And they were to trust in him. He didn't teach in a way that they'd become data-driven or self-righteous or so impressive on how they knew things. There was a lot of people, even the scribes, during that time. They knew stuff. They knew the Old Testament. But Jesus was pointing out something different. That this was not to be a humanistic, selfish, self-centered, self-righteous, driven Christianity, a life following him. This is to be a Christ-centered, Father-declaring, Spirit-empowered life that we are to engage with, that we're to see him, to trust him. So then as pastors, and what we're trying to do even right now, is hold to that, is to train people to recognize that God is their ultimate goal, not a Sunday service. Doesn't matter if they're a single mom struggling with 3 kids, or it doesn't matter if they're a big family, a single person, or a kid. Whoever it is, we're to train them to understand and see life through God's eyes. I don't think that's anything new, but I'll tell you, it is extremely difficult to hold to that, because as a pastor, you begin not doing things for people in a type of way that would substitute God's life for them. You begin to say no to things, and you begin to say yes to certain things. And next thing you know, you start to see people begin to mature and to be responsible, even under the hardship of life. And next thing you know, they don't live under hardship of life. They're on a balanced foundation with the weight of God's glory. I think that's Hebrew, right? That's the glory, the weight of who he is, so humbling us to recognize him, to walk in then grief, joy. When it's time to laugh, we laugh. When it's time to cry, we cry. But nonetheless, he is who he says he is. He exists. And we as pastors get the opportunity, the call to be part of that, to train people to that end. And I think that becomes an encouragement, even to them. Because now they don't see us as a performer, an entertainer, a programmer. They start to see us as an under-shepherd, a pastor, an elder, someone who oversees an area, a people, so that they are prepared as a way of protection. And the way they're prepared is equipped and trained to trust in Christ, even in the midst of difficulties in life, where nothing can substitute in there. Not even a healing of some kind, not even a paycheck of some kind. No matter what it is, we cannot substitute other things where God is to be, even those things that He's created. So what are we doing here? Are we trying to be a church plant? The church that plants more churches? Are we trying to be a big church, mega church, family church, organic church, missional church? Are we here to make disciples that make disciples? Kinda. Maybe, yeah. I think maybe our ultimate goal is Him. And then we start to see He builds His church. I think this is how He begins to do it. And He will do it even in spite of any one of us. He accomplishes His goals, what He desires, His will. But next thing you know, when we become collectively as pastors, those that recognize this, I think people start to understand what it looks like to become a new creation and to walk in that. And if, Lord willing, they have years in front of them to live on this earth, they'll begin to understand what that means to walk in that newness as they get older in age, that they'll be more passionate in the day they die, when the day they came to know Christ. And the pressures of this life would not break them because they've already been broken by the great truth of who God is, especially the gospel of Jesus Christ, that He has come to the earth to reveal the Father, to be empowered by the Spirit, to put us in reconciled relationship to Him forever by the forgiveness of sins because of what He's done, not because of what we know, self-righteousness in the sense, but rather we recognize what He's already done beyond us on our behalf. And that He did die on that cross and He resurrected a few days later and He ascended to heaven. And upon all that, He has trained all those people, especially then those disciples, those specific 11 that went on into the book of Acts in the New Testament. They stood in front waiting to declare. And when it was time to declare the truth of who God was and is and will forever be, especially the truth of God in flesh, Jesus Christ, they would stand up like Peter did and would say, "This Jesus," even if that meant they died. Because their ultimate goal was not to save their life, even financially, relationally. It was to understand Him, that He's the ultimate goal. And therefore, in their declaration, they were leading hundreds and thousands of people, not to feast on them, but to feast on Him, to listen to Him, to trust Him. Oh, that's a beautiful truth, especially as pastors equipping and training others. So I encourage us as a network of friends and churches that are coming together to understand our ultimate goal is Him. Our telos is Him. And I think that is beautiful. And it's great to be united in that belief and mindset. It's great to be united in that spirit. And it's great to be united in that collectively and as a friendship. And if you are a church that is just listening or tuned in to understand who am I, or a couple of pastors that have already joined, or some of the people that have already been coming around together for the last couple of years, you have an opportunity to get to know me personally. Email me, call me. Let's put it on the calendar. Maybe I can share a little bit more in specific detail, either of doctrine or you could say practicality, which I think doctrine is, and everything else. I think God Himself is practical. Him being the ultimate goal is practical. But I would love to hear from you. And the more pastors we start to either encourage, but also specifically bring on board in a collective sense here, we want them to be financially supported. But we want them at the heart called and convicted and characterized and confirmed that no matter if there's finances, they're called to pastor. But if we can feed the ox while he's tilling and working, we want to do that. We want to fight that. We want to fight for that. But our ultimate goal is actually not that. So we're saying, hey, there's opportunities for people to be generous, either as a whole church community, or individually, and they become part of the network, of the Telos network of supporting friends and churches. I think that's great. I think what a great opportunity. I think Paul was right to tell Timothy, we're to fight the good fight of faith, and part of these things are encouraging you, Timothy, to feed on the Lord, and let's come together and help support you financially. Let us give you provisions. What happened to then the American church? Where is the help and the financial support? Where is the resources? I think it's because we have missed our ultimate goal. I think we missed the mark. And I think we have an opportunity, even in the years ahead of us, to recalibrate, to rethink, to go back in time in history. And I think we don't get to certain historical figures, but to rather see those historical figures lead back to one who's the epicenter of history and time and of the universe and of God's Word, Jesus. I think he's good news. So I would love to see more people come together, individually or collectively as churches, to come together and support this, to say we care for this. We want more pastors with this heart, locally, wherever you're at, and also here. We would love that. So please get a hold of me if you can, or share this if you'd like. I'm going to try with my time. I'm working, I'm doing things, I'm meeting people, we're doing a lot. But our ultimate goal is not to spin our wheels in the wrong ways. We're trying to spin these wheels in the right ways with our ultimate goal set on Him. So we're trying to work this out ourselves. So this is not like, hey, we have it, but we're trying to fight this good fight of faith here and now. So we'd love for you guys to join, to come on board, whatever that means, however you want me to say that. I just want to make clear what we're trying to do. And we don't want to compromise that. So thank you so much, guys, for letting me share and taking your time to listen. Appreciate it.